The first thing he noticed was the reflection, not of the city lights trembling against the cafe window, but of himself, older than his years, shoulders slumped under a weight no balance sheet could explain, when a quiet sentence landed on him like falling snow. "You look tired, like my husband before he left." It wasn't said to wound, but it cut straight through the armor he wore so well, the tailored suit and the practiced stillness, and for a moment the noise of the street faded into a hush where memory and grief breathed the same cold air. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the small moments that can change a life, take a second now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this live because you believe in them. The cafe had become his refuge precisely because it asked nothing of him. The barista knew his order, the corner table faced the window, and the city beyond it offered movement without demands. Snow drifted down like ash from a quieter fire, and inside the warm light softened the edges of everything. He came here after long days when the boardroom felt like a tribunal and the numbers refused to add up to meaning. The company he built from nothing was now a monument he had to maintain, and every success only made the silence at home louder. He wore exhaustion like a second skin, not the kind sleep could cure, but the kind that settles when purpose thins. She stood near his table with a small notepad, hands steady despite the tremor in her eyes, a young widow balancing responsibility with a gentleness that had survived loss. Her hair was pinned back with care that spoke of habit, not vanity, and there was a ring absent from her hand that left a pale echo behind. She worked the early mornings and the late afternoons, took classes at night, and went home to a quiet apartment where grief lingered like the scent of rain on wool. When she spoke to him, it wasn't curiosity that guided her, but recognition. She had learned to read the fatigue in faces after watching it hollow out the men she loved, the way ambition can become a storm that never leaves shore. He did not answer. He stared past the glass at the snow, remembering airports and promises postponed, dinners reheated, a calendar filled with goals that never asked who they would cost. The sentence stayed with him because it did not accuse. It carried sorrow without bitterness, a shared understanding that exhaustion is sometimes a language, and that those who speak it can hear each other even in a crowded room. Over the weeks that followed, he returned more often than usual, not for the coffee but for the quiet continuity. He noticed the rhythm of her days, the way she moved through the cafe with an economy born of necessity, how she smiled with her eyes when children pressed their faces to the glass outside. He learned that grief doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it hides behind diligence and a careful kindness extended to strangers. He watched as she folded napkins during lulls, counting something unseen, perhaps time, perhaps courage. The company, meanwhile, was unraveling in ways no quarterly report could predict. A merger loomed, hungry and impersonal, and the people he employed were numbers in someone else's strategy. He sat in meetings where words like synergy and efficiency replaced names, and he felt the familiar pull to sacrifice himself for an outcome he no longer trusted. Late nights returned. His phone glowed in the dark, a lighthouse that led nowhere. The cafe became a place where he could breathe, and she became the silent witness to his unraveling, offering refills and a presence that did not demand explanations. She carried her own storms. The men she lost had left not by choice but by a sudden illness that turned their future into a question mark. She remembered the last winter they shared, how he grew thin and distant, how she learned to measure time in appointments and whispered reassurances. When he was gone, the world did not stop, but it lost its music. She learned resilience the hard way, discovering that survival is an active verb, that love can become a task you carry forward alone. One afternoon, as snow thickened and the city softened, he finally met her gaze. There was no confession, no dramatic unveiling, just a mutual acknowledgement that two lives had been crossing without touching. Something shifted then, not into romance, but into recognition. He began to tip too much and linger too long, and she began to ask about his day in a way that suggested she could hear the answer even before he spoke it. Change came slowly, the way real change always does. He began to leave the office earlier, to decline meetings that did not matter, to walk instead of drive when the air was sharp and honest. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed the way the cafe filled with warmth when the sun dipped, how people found refuge in shared spaces. He started a scholarship fund quietly, without press releases, for employees' children who worked evenings and studied nights like she did. The numbers still mattered, but so did the names. For her, the cafe shifted from a place of endurance to one of possibility. She saved enough to reduce her hours and focused on her studies, finding confidence in the idea that her future could be designed, not merely endured. She learned that grief could coexist with hope, that loving again did not erase what was lost, but honored it by choosing life. She noticed that when he smiled, it reached his eyes now, that the tiredness she had named was loosening its grip. The city changed too, or perhaps it was always this way and they were only now paying attention. Snow melted into streams along the curb, and the cafe windows fogged with breath and laughter. The lonely CEO became a man who sat among people, who learned that leadership could be an act of care. The young widow became a woman who allowed herself to imagine joy without guilt, who understood that strength is not the absence of sorrow but the decision to move with it. They never rushed what grew between them. There were shared silences and careful boundaries, an understanding that healing is not a race. They talked about work and weather, about books and the best way to make coffee at home. They spoke of loss without spectacle, of ambition without apology. In those conversations, he learned to rest, and she learned to trust the future again. As spring edged into the city, the cafe windows opened, and the world felt less distant. He stood one morning and realized that the exhaustion he carried had thinned into something manageable, something human. She watched him leave with a steadier step and felt a quiet pride, not because she had saved him, but because they had witnessed each other's becoming. If this story is touching something inside you, if it reminds you of someone you've lost or a chance you're still waiting to take, please pause here and engage with the video. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help these stories reach hearts that need them. Just before the ending, we ask one special thing. Comment below with the word hope if you believe small moments can change lives, or share a single sentence about a moment that changed yours. In the end, it wasn't a grand gesture that altered their paths, but a sentence spoken without armor, a recognition offered without expectation. The cafe remained a place of warmth and quiet, the city continued its restless dance, and two people learned that kindness, once noticed, can become a compass. The tiredness did not vanish, it transformed, becoming a reminder of how far they had come. And in that simple truth, that being seen can be the beginning of healing, they found a reason to keep showing up, for themselves and for the world waiting just beyond the glass.